See, when I got the word that there was a possible abuse going on in a home, I didn't wait till the end of service. My team, we didn't wait a day or even a minute. We immediately went to the parents and asked them to step out of service for a few minutes while we started our procedure. Hey guys, I just got back from family vacation. Ironically, while we were there, we launched this brand new master training course for church security. This course is easily the most comprehensive church security course you can find on the internet. There's more than 60 videos, over 100 downloads. We got to this point when we were launching this course where I forgot how many downloads we actually have. We were going over some of the downloads that I had forgotten that we had made these things. Guys, we've got scripts, we've got checklists, we've got almost pretty much anything that you can think of that you could need, and then some. See, this is going to help you become the leader that your church needs in order to have a community that is safe and inviting. We don't want to be safe or inviting. We want to be both. The link for that course is going to be in the description of this podcast, whether you're listening to it on Apple or watching on YouTube. The description is going to have a link so that you can check that course out. Now, not too long ago, I had to manage a situation at our church. It was one of those situations that cause your heart to just sink into your stomach. See, I got a word from our kids director that during the prayer time, one of our kids informed their prayer worker, the one that was praying with them, that she wanted prayer because when her parents aren't around, her older brother touches her inappropriately. Now, before we get into the rest of that story, I do want to ask you to help me communicate this to the algorithm that this type of information needs to be heard. Do me a favor and go ahead and give this podcast a like. If you're watching on YouTube, give it a like, subscribe to the channel. And if you have any questions about church security or anything that I'm going to mention in this podcast, I'd love to read your questions. I'd love to become a new resource for you and your community. Now, for me, it was a bit nerve-wracking to have to confront parents and manage this type of situation. You never know how parents are going to react, right? You don't know if they're going to be embarrassed, if they're going to leave the church, or even sometimes, not even sometimes, oftentimes, most of the time, abusers act the way they do because they themselves were abused, which means the son was possibly an abuser because he had been abused. And if he had been abused, it was likely that it was being done by a parent. So going into our investigation phase, we had lots of questions with no answers. In short, we were able to conduct a quick investigation and found that because of a language barrier, so this family was not from the United States originally, and they had a language barrier. And because of that language barrier, this girl was using the word inappropriate for when her brother would hit her or push her, but it was nothing of the sexual nature. Luckily, we had a procedure for managing abuse or even possible abuse. However, we understand that not everybody has a procedure that's laid out like that in place. So in this podcast, I'm going to lay out a simple procedure or a simple plan of action that you can follow if you're facing possible abuse or even maybe possible neglect. Now, this first step in this simple plan of action is simply taking notice of signs of abuse or signs of neglect. We talk about situational awareness on this channel a lot. The reason situational awareness is talked about so often on this channel is our first line of defense on any front, whether it's kids ministry, youth ministry, the main sanctuary. The first line of defense is always going to be being situationally aware. Now, what does that mean? In short, it just means pay attention. And that's going to go so far when it comes to our kids and noticing abuse. Is just paying attention. One of the ways that you pay attention to your kids is first you have to, in any other situation, you have to establish what we call a baseline. So we have to know what is normal. And you're only going to know what's normal for kids if you get to know your kids. Because some kids, it might be normal to be a bit withdrawn. Some kids are normally shy. But if you have a kid that is normally outgoing, but all of a sudden, for almost no reason, at least no reason known to you, that kid becomes anxious. That kid becomes shy. That kid isn't raising their hand anymore. They don't have any answers. That might be something that needs to be taken note of. See, some kids have anxiety, but they don't know how to describe anxiety. They don't say, I'm feeling anxious. Oftentimes, kids will say something like, I've got this funny feeling in my stomach or in my belly. Some kids, you might be a sign if some kids have a sudden loss of self-confidence, or even during snack time. Maybe this kid, his baseline is normally he's eating up his snack and then he's asking all of the other kids if he can have their oranges too. But all of a sudden he has no appetite. If you have a kid that's in your kids' church or even in your youth group, and you see any of these kinds of signs settle in, especially if they settle in seemingly out of nowhere, we've got to take a note. We've got to make note of it. Those kids are our responsibility when they are in our care. So the first step that we have to do is we have to just take note. We have to be aware. We have to be awake. The second step in this plan of action is to alert the ministry director. That might be a kids pastor or a youth pastor. You've got to alert the ministry director. If you are a volunteer listening to this podcast, or you're a volunteer watching this on YouTube, don't take all of that responsibility on yourself. The director of the ministry should be the one that takes the next step, that takes on that task, and they initiate a conversation with the child. Now, this conversation isn't going to be an interrogation. It's just a simple couple questions. A friend who is concerned about another friend. If abuse is suspected, say they've got a bruised arm, or they've even a bumped head or a bruised head. I just want you to ask a couple simple questions. Simple questions. Hey, what happened to your arm? Or another good one would be, who was there when you got hurt? Even another good question would be, how does it make you feel? Like, especially if you know that it comes out that somebody hurt them. Ask them, how does it make you feel when this type of thing happens? You want to ensure that your investigation doesn't have a hint of interrogations. Don't ask leading questions. I want to encourage you not to just listen with your ears. I want you to listen with your eyes as well. That sounds a bit funny, but what I'm saying is, what is their body language saying? What are the nonverbal saying? And sometimes, we try to get way too scientific with reading body language, but body language isn't 2 + 2 = 4. Just because you look up and to the left doesn't mean you're absolutely lying every single time. There are some indicators, but instead of feeling like you have to become some body language specialist, what I want you to do is just look for signs that the person that you're talking to might be uncomfortable. Do any of their nonverbal cues tell you that they're uncomfortable with the conversation? So after you've had that conversation, or after your ministry director has had that conversation, if you're a ministry director, you need to stay in this conversation. Your feet are planted. You've got your cleats on and you are dug in. You are in this for the long haul. So no matter what your findings are, no matter what you think, the third thing that has to happen in this procedure is you need to inform your pastoral leadership. You need to go find your senior pastor. Don't put it off. Don't say, I'm going to send him an email when I get home. You need to get to your pastor's office immediately. The best we can hope to do in a situation like this is make an educated prediction as to if abuse or neglect is occurring or if it's present. Now, even if the prediction is made using sufficient information, there is always margin for error. In these situations, we have to keep lines of communication open so we can handle the situations with the highest level of care. We cannot afford to write people off. Now, the fourth step in this process is to complete incident reports. Incident reporting provides insights into ways we can improve our community. Reports provide objective information. That means information that isn't just opinion. It's objective information through which leaders can identify areas of improvement and then apply the required changes to establish a culture of safety and security. Incident reports need to be written as soon as possible, so all of the information is as accurate as it can be. Make sure whoever are writing those incident reports are writing facts. There's no assumptions, no opinions. It's no I feel like statements. They are only factual statements. Another reason you need those incident reports are so you have something that you can review in the case that things go any further legally. Now, the final step in this process is to contact social services. Different states have different entities that are set up. In Virginia, we've got the Child Protective Services, but each state should have something along those same lines. You'll want to make initial contact with social services or your state's Child Protective Services via phone. Give them all the facts that you have. Go get your incident report and read all of those facts to them. There's no assumptions, no conjecture, only facts. No opinions, only exactly what happened, exactly what was said. Directly following the call, what I want you to do is send an email to the case manager that's been assigned to your case. Give them all of the same information. Reference everything that you've discussed. The follow-up email will give social services a sense of urgency where it's needed. And it's also going to create a paper trail that's going to help you in the case of any liability issues. These are the types of events or incidences that, quite frankly, none of us ever want to have to manage or navigate through. However, we have to be prepared for these exact types of situations. When we manage these types of situations with care, even a nightmare such as this, such as abuse, such as neglect, has a way of leading people, especially broken people, back to the foot of the cross. In the case that I mentioned from my church, that family was gracious. Not only were they gracious, they were incredibly thankful that their kids were a part of a kids ministry that cared so much about them, that loved them so much, that we weren't willing to be quiet for a moment. See, when I got the word that there was a possible abuse going on in a home, I didn't wait till the end of service. My team, we didn't wait a day or even a minute. We immediately went to the parents and asked them to step out of service for a few minutes while we started our procedure. I want to thank everybody for joining me for this episode. Whether you're listening on Apple Podcast or watching on YouTube, thank you so much for joining me for today's episode of the Lead Church Security Podcast. My name is Preston Hocker. I've been on staff at my church for 20 years. I'm a fourth generation pastor. I know church, but I also have a security company. We specialize in private investigation and executive protection, as well as armed security. Here's the point. I know church and I know security, and that's why I do this. If you found any value in this conversation, make sure you take a moment to like it, share it with your pastor or your security director, or even, especially this episode, make sure you share it with your kids' ministry director. hit that subscribe button. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of these strategies, insights, or tools that are going to help you lead security in your local community. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.